Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share Skinwalker encounter horror stories. First story. I saw a Skinwalker on Riverdale Road last night. For context, me and my boyfriend go to this winding road called Riverdale Road in Thornton, Colorado. There is numerous things haunting this road, like a phantom Camaro that can run you off the road, or a little girl in a white dress who walks along the side of the road and can appear in your back seat, or even a jogger who was killed asking for a ride. It's an 11-mile stretch going from Thornton all the way to Frederick. Anyways, we go pretty frequently, but never really saw anything until a couple weeks ago. It was about 2:30 a.m. We were getting onto Riverdale through McKay. As we entered, the air was warm, but there was a pungent smell of horse shit since people actually do live on this road and have horses and land here. We have our windows down, and not even 2 minutes on the road, my boyfriend shouts, "Holy shit, what the hell was that?" Clearly panicking. I asked frantically over and over, "What did you see?" He was silent for a couple seconds, then rolls up his sleeves to uncover the goosebumps on his arm. When I looked over at him, his mouth was wide open with his hand covering it. I saw a figure, looked like something in a white dress running in the field, he said in a very serious tone. After that, we were both shaken up and decided to leave immediately after. The whole ride home consisted of "What was that?" or "Are you sure that's what you saw?" We went to bed still thinking about what we had seen. He's very good at covering up his emotions, and I almost felt like I was more afraid than him, even though I hadn't seen it. We both were afraid of this road for good reasons. After this encounter, it wasn't enough to stop us from coming back. We had gone back a couple times after, but never saw anything. We just felt like we were being watched. Very eerie feeling, almost sinister. Fast forward to yesterday. It was about 1:30 a.m., the same warm air, but this time it smelled of something rotting. Putrid smell. We go back, and right off the bat, we see two dead raccoons not even 100 feet from each other down the road. I didn't have any good feelings about that, and I already knew it wasn't a good sign, but we decided to continue. We traveled on the road 2 times beginning to end without seeing anything, and as we both wanted to leave, we said, well, at third time's a charm, and went one last time, except this time, we asked politely that if there was anything out to show itself, and holy shit, I was not prepared to what I was about to witness. I don't think my boyfriend was ready to what he was about to hear either. As we get towards the middle of this road, there is a small concrete barricade on a slight curve, and that's where I saw it. Its pale, scrawny body, bald head, and long arms sitting almost hunched over the barricade. Right when our car lights illuminate that thing, it swiftly hides behind the barricade, going back into the pitch black woods behind it. I shout to my boyfriend, "Babe, did you see that thing?" He replies, "No, what?" "What? What?" Petrified since he was already on edge. I drive faster, and then it hit me. "Babe, I think that was an SW. He looks at me, a look of someone who has just seen a ghost. But it wasn't a ghost, it was something far worse. We left immediately after that and don't plan on going back anytime soon. I can confidently say that was the most terrifying encounter I've ever had in my entire 20 years of existence. Second story. Is my new kitten actually a skinwalker? Hi guys. I'm having some trouble making up my mind about this. Just a heads up, I'm Norwegian, so my grammar and spelling might not be perfect. So I'll just start the story from the beginning. I live a bit outside of town, and I like walking in the forest almost daily to clear my mind and just take in nature. Well, obviously, I sometimes see animals, and sometimes I come across injured animals, and if I see it necessary, I bring them home and nurse them back to health. A couple of weeks ago on my walk, I heard some squeaking a bit off the trail. I went to see what it was, and I found a kitten, practically newborn. I wasn't really sure what to do. The mom should be around somewhere, right? I reluctantly kept walking, worried that the mother might not come back if I stuck around. Maybe she was getting food or something. I stayed within earshot, though, because I didn't want the kitten to be snatched up by a predator or freeze to death or something. I waited for about an hour, I think, before I decided that the mother probably abandoned it. I walked over to it, bent down, and started talking in that high-pitched voice everyone does around any kind of baby. Its eyes weren't open yet, but it moved its head towards my voice and tried to crawl towards me. I noticed that it didn't have a tail. I checked for an injury, but it just looked like it was born without it. Maybe that's why the mother left it? I gently picked it up, walked home with it inside of my jacket to keep it warm, got in my car and drove to the vet. I told the vet how I found it, and she started checking her out. She told me that it was a girl and that she seemed healthy, except from the lacking tail, of course, but that shouldn't be a big problem. Her balance might be affected, but since she's born without it, she'll get used to it easily. She asked me if I was planning on keeping her, and I said yes. Obviously, the little fur ball was adorable. The vet helped me with some formula and basic stuff for it, litter box, food bowl, etc. She registered us in the system. I named her Shira. She congratulated me on my new kitten, and I left, happy about having some life in my apartment again. Shira is growing fast, and after just a few days it started to show that this isn't a normal house cat, but a bobcat. I don't really know what to do. I'm supposed to take her back to the veterinarian soon for vaccines, but I canceled the appointment and said that she didn't survive. Bobcats are obviously wild animals, and it's legal in Norway to take in a wild animal in need of help for a short while before releasing it. But Shira knows nothing about being wild. She wouldn't survive on her own. If I take her back to the vet, she'll be put down. And I've already fallen in love with my little goofball. I'm not planning on keeping her as an inside cat, though. She'll come and go as she pleases. But most likely she'll always need me to make sure that she's well fed and healthy. You probably think I'm crazy for wanting to take care of a bobcat and letting her into my house whenever she wants, but I've had cats before, and there is this special bond of trust when you take care of a cat practically from birth. I know I'm dragging on, and you want to hear about the Skinwalker, and I'm getting there. I just wanted you to know everything from before I started suspecting. A couple of days ago, now she opened her eyes, and seeing her eyes scared the shit out of me. Her eyes are human, like you can see the white around the pupils. I've had several cats before, never a bobcat, of course, but I'm pretty sure the eyes aren't supposed to look like that. It's not just like small cat pupils, it's definitely the eyes of a human. And that was when all the Skinwalker stories I've read and heard came crashing into my mind. The lack of tail and the human eyes are repeated in several stories. Don't ask me how a Skinwalker would end up in Norway, though. I thought it was a Native American thing. She's pretty much like any other kitten, though, playful and innocent. She needs me, and I guess I need her too. I don't really have anyone else. I don't care if people don't believe me. In fact, I'd prefer if you don't. But I need advice, so if you could just pretend to be part of a movie or something, what advice would you give? Is there anything I can do to check to confirm if Shira is a Skinwalker or not? Has anyone ever had a friendly meeting with a Skinwalker? Maybe taken care of an injured animal who turned out to be a Skinwalker? I need someone to talk to about this, but because of legal reasons I can't talk to anyone here, just because she's a bobcat, and I don't want her to get cut open and experimented on if people find out that she's a Skinwalker, if she actually is. So, I thought, why not turn to the wonderful Reddit community? The only thank you I can give is to keep you updated on her, how she develops, and whatever I find out. If she doesn't kill me first, of course, tongue sticking out, I don't think she will, though. She seems like she trusts me. Third story. Did I see a Skinwalker? This happened in September of last year. We live on a huge horse farm in southern KY. My mother, the horse fanatic in the family, travels all over the country taking out horses to shows and competitions. During that time, I usually get stuck at home, with the responsibility of feeding the animals and other non-show horses. My parents were at a weekend-long show. It was around 5:30 p.m., and I was on my way down to the barn to give the horses their evening meal. Our horses are arranged into multiple sections, pregnant mares in one, show horses in another ECT. Hey, erase a screen cap from Google Earth of it to kind of give you guys an idea. I was almost done feeding and only had the southwest corner section to go when I looked into the field that lined that section that we let the horses graze in the spring and saw something that I really can't explain with words. It was far enough away that I couldn't make out facial features, but I could tell it wasn't human. It was standing upright, two legs that seemed to be on backwards. Instead of the knees going forward, they went the opposite way. The closest thing I can describe it to would be like a very thin, hairless, less horse standing up. I didn't notice any arms, but with how far away it is, I'm assuming they could have just been so close to the body that I didn't see them. I kind of doodled this to give you guys an idea of what it looked like. It scared the hell out of me, but I don't think it saw me. It looked like it was watching my house, which was about 100 yards to the northwest of there. I kind of just stood there. I didn't really know what to do, so I just kind of slowly started backing up until I was back in the barn. There's a small part in the barn where there are a couple missing boards that you can easily see out of, so I stood there watching it for a while. I didn't want to try to go back home because I was worried it would see me, so I just waited. I waited for what felt like forever before this thing kind of turned around and walked away into the woods. The way it walked was the scariest thing about it. It was so unnatural. I waited a little bit, then ran back to the house as quickly as I could. The next morning my parents got home, so I didn't have to feed the horses again after that. I've never told anyone about this either, but after discovering skinwalkers, I'm wondering what you guys think. If not a skinwalker, what else could it be? Fourth story, Skinwalker/Go Man sighting. I was told to post this here by a friend, as he said my story sounded similar to some urban legend about skinwalkers/Go Man. I've never heard of it before, but I Googled it and saw lots of stories and videos about it, and something about some farm in Utah in America. Anyway, some background. I'm 28 years old, and I live in Camden, England. Ever since a kid, I've always had this weird obsession about the States, traveling through the States, and generally seeing lots of sights. I'm not a city guy, far from it. My parents are both farmers, and I like the outdoors a lot. I joined a rock climbing club when I was in my teens and met two good friends, James and Grant, who came on the trip with me in 2012. I had always planned to go to the States, Colorado to be specific, because of the forests and the mountains. We all agreed to go, saved for a year, and off we went. We were in Denver, which by the way is a great city, and later we traveled south down Highway 87, through Colorado Springs, down to Walsenburg, and then headed west, and ended up in a very small town after about 4/5 hours, somewhere close to the New Mexico border. We had actually got there due to meeting some friends in Denver who were keen explorers like ourselves, and they asked if we wanted to join them on a road trip/camping trip, so we did. There were 5 of them: Chris, another James, Richard, Melissa, and Lucy. And us 3, myself, James, and Grant. The first 2 nights were great. Chris and Richard liked to hunt and had brought alone their rifles with them, and they taught us a few things about shooting and whatnot. On the 3rd night, all 8 of us went on a little walk through the forest, having a look around and taking all the amazing views in. The girls, Lucy and Melissa, wanted to head back to the cabin to start cooking the dinner for us, and Richard went back with them. So, Chris, the 2 James, Grant, and I roamed around. Up ahead on the trail, I point out to Chris I saw what looked like a deer, but as quick as I could grab their attention and turn back around, it was gone. I probably made way too much noise, to be honest, and scared it off. But a few minutes later I saw it again. It was a little weird, though. It looked a little darker than a deer, and had more fur. It didn't look right at all. It was like a man on all 4s or something, and just didn't seem to move very smoothly. I must have been so focused on this deer that I was completely oblivious to the smell that surrounded us that Grant pointed out. It smelt like death or blood, but it felt warm and metallic. It was horrible. I asked Chris if there was some kind of factory nearby, but he said there wasn't really anything like that for miles. I really did smell. It was stomach-turning, and I have a strong stomach from living on a farm for my whole life. We turned back anyway to head back to the cabin to meet the others. We walked for about 10 minutes when I saw what looked like the same deer in the distance to my right, and I swear to God it stood up on its hind legs. I called Chris at the front and said to the others to look to the right, and they did. James laughed and said it looks like a guy, and Grant suggested it was another group of people out walking as well. But I told them it stood up and that it was the deer from earlier I tried to get them to look at. I was adamant about it. But they looked at me like I was stupid, as it was definitely a figure of a person with his back to us. Chris called out at it, and there was no reply. He called again, and nothing. Then we all shouted out, "Are you okay over there?" The reply was subtle, but loud enough to be heard. "It's Richard." We all looked at each other confused, because he was supposed to be with the girls. He called out again, "It's Richard," and it definitely sounded like him. Chris told him to stop ***king around, and we carried on walking, and I looked back after no more than 5 seconds, and he was gone, completely. That was no way enough time to just disappear without seeing him run off. We got back to the cabin eventually. Lucy and Melissa were in the kitchen making dinner, and Richard was chilling with them. Chris told Richard to not leave the girls again, as he was the only one with them, and it wasn't safe to leave them alone due to wild animals. But Richard said he'd been here the whole time with them. Confusing, Chris, Grant, the two James, and I looked at each other and laughed, telling him we saw him in the woods with us, and you said it's Richard when we shouted at him. But he looked at us with a dead straight face. "Seriously, guys, I was here the whole time," and the girls confirmed it. We all just shrugged it off. The three of them were in on the joke. They got us. I managed to wake up around 3 a.m., dead thirsty, and needed a drink, and that rank smell was back. The smell probably woke me up, to be honest. I went into the kitchen to get a drink of water, and I could hear rustling from outside. It wasn't like someone was walking, but it sounded like someone was crawling around. I turned on the outside light, which didn't do much at all, but about 20 meters away at the edge of the forest, I saw another figure. It was very dark outside, and I'm sure I was just seeing things, but the figure was like yesterday, just there, motionless, a black-figured silhouette with its back turned towards me. I was freaking out. I went back to the bedrooms and woke up the boys. They weren't really 100% awake yet, probably pissed off I'd woken them up, but when I showed them what I was looking at, they soon came around. James opened the cabin door, which was facing where the person was, to get a better view, and we all huddled around the door entrance to see also. Chris had a huge maglite torch on him and just shone it at the figure, and it didn't move. Grant shouted out in a typical British way, "You cunt," which just made us laugh, but the figure didn't move. We were pretty alarmed by this point, and we decided to go back inside, and as we turned around to go back, and we heard it's Richard. We all just looked at each other, and we all looked at Richard in chaos ensured. I and the others had no idea what the hell to do. Richard wasn't, to my knowledge, a guy that could throw his voice, but the voice was his, and Richard did not speak. We waited for what seemed like a lifetime for the sun to come up, constantly checking outside. Richard and Chris's rifles never left their hands. We grabbed the girls and just left as fast as we could. Fifth story. My Skinwalker encounter. The story I'm about to tell you happened a few months ago. It still chills me to the bone. Never would I have thought something like this would happen to me. But yet it did. I turned on the TV and walked into the kitchen. The microwave started beeping, meaning my bag of popcorn was done cooking. I took it out, grabbed the butter from the counter, and poured it on. The butter sizzled down through the kernels to the bottom of the bag. I went over to the couch and sat down. The TV was turned to a breaking news report. Hundreds of dogs from all around Ukiah, New Mexico, seemed to have suddenly gone missing. The Nevada Department of Conservation and Natural Resources says that they are looking into why these disappearances are occurring. More on this at 12. said the newscaster. I threw my bowl of uneaten popcorn in the trash and decided to go to bed. It was getting pretty late, and I had a meeting early in the morning. I went upstairs and into my room. My dog Laika, a large golden retriever, was laying on the ground. She looked up at me with sad doggy eyes before dropping her head back down onto the carpet. "Hey, buddy," I said. "What's the matter?" Of course, my dog just laid there aimlessly, staring at the wall. I shrugged and went into the bathroom to get ready for bed. I hopped in a quick shower, brushed my teeth, and climbed in bed. Staring up at the ceiling, I emptied my mind and drifted off to sleep. Boom, boom, boom. The loud pounding on the door jolted me awake. I shot upright and looked over at the clock. 3:33 a.m. God damn it, I muttered as I pulled the covers off me. I looked over at the floor where Laika was laying only to see it was now vacant. I sighed and walked out the open door into the hallway. It was dark, and not because there were no lights on. Something felt off. The air felt thicker, no, heavier than normal. I rounded the corner to the stairs when I was abruptly hit with this awful smell. It smelled like rotten meat. I pulled my shirt up over my face and covered my nose, but I could still smell it. I walked down the stairs and looked around for Laika, but she was nowhere to be seen. Confused, I walked over to open the large front door. Just as I was about to open it, something stopped me. I felt a chill run from the back of my neck all the way down my spine. I shuddered and opened the door. There was nobody there. I looked around my empty front yard. Then, I stepped out and scanned the tree line in the back of the yard. There was nothing out there. Slowly, I closed the front door and stepped back inside. As I turned around, I was surprised to see Laika suddenly standing at the door. I leaned down to pet her, but stopped. There was something off about her. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but then I started to notice. Her ears were standing straight up, which she never does. Drool and slobber poured from her open mouth, which revealed her jagged, pointed teeth, which appeared sharper than normal. I looked at her eyes. Something wasn't right about them. They looked dark and empty, but most noticeably, they looked human. She began to bark, and I stepped back. Tripping, I fell onto the ground and scurried backwards. Her bark echoed through the house. It sounded off, almost as if it was her bark, but at the same time, there was a deeper sound to it as well. Something not natural. Something demonic. Suddenly her head snapped sharply left, and she looked at me. She looked right at me with those black, lifeless eyes. Then, just as soon as she appeared, Laika was gone. She stood up, looked at the door, then back at me, before wandering down the hall towards the kitchen. Terrified, I ran upstairs and closed the door. I walked past Laika, now laying on the floor of my room, and got back in bed to go to sleep. It wasn't until I had just started to drift off to sleep when I realized I had seen Laika go down the hall, not into my room. Whatever I had seen downstairs was not my dog. It was something else entirely. Flash forward 6 months. One of my clients, a Dr. Ashki Dayan, who was a Native American man from the local Navajo tribe, came into my work one Monday afternoon. Before we had started talking business, I had him introduce himself to me and tell me a few stories about himself. One of the stories he told caught my attention. He told a story about an encounter he had with a tribal creature known as a Skinwalker. He said that these creatures, Skinwalkers, were evil creatures summoned by Navajo witches that had the ability to transform into any animal they pleased. He also described the awful, wretched odor that they give off. I was shocked, now positive that I had an encounter with a Skinwalker, that one fateful night I jumped back from my desk, running to the bathroom. I had no clue what to do. Until this point, I had been told my whole life that monsters aren't real. Now I know that's just not true. Monsters are real. All you have to do is know where to look. Sixth story. There's a man standing across the street from my house. He does this strange thing. I couldn't sleep. The tension was too much. Every time I peeked out my bedroom window, I saw him standing there. He was about 100 feet away, across the street, under a tree by the lamppost, frozen like a statue. I first spotted him around 1 a.m. He stood there for hours. I couldn't make out his eyes from the distance, but I knew he was looking straight at me. I knew this because my room is on the second floor of the house, and his head was pointing upwards. Everything about the man was odd. I've never seen anyone like him. There was a mailbox a few feet from him, and it was half his size, but the tree shielded almost everything else. And that's all I could see. I waited and waited for him to step forward so that dusty, old lamppost would illuminate him in its yellow glow. I couldn't sleep knowing there was a black figure of a man stalking me from under an oak tree across the street. I got closer to the window and waved at him. I toddled my head and put my hands on my hip. I leaned forward and squinted, engaging him in a stare down. Nothing. I didn't see anyone else out on the street, not even those pesky raccoons. That night was eerily quiet and hopelessly dark. Even the moon was hiding. I dragged a cushion chair to the window and continued to watch. I put one foot on the frame and sat back. I let out a strong yawn. My eyes began to droop, and my guard fell. I woke up in the chair and learned that I had been asleep just 5 minutes. I almost forgot why I was sitting in the chair until I looked out the window in front of me. He was still there. At that point, I thought of calling the cops, but I didn't. What if he's homeless? Am I really going to call the cops on some poor man? I can't even prove he's doing anything to me in particular. So I sat back in my chair and watched. But something finally caught my eye in the corner of the window. A dog made its way on the sidewalk towards the man. It was a big German shepherd, wagging its tail and sniffing each and every trash can it passed by. I leaned forward as I watched it get closer and closer towards the man under the tree. The dog stopped and tucked its tail between its legs, watching the man in confusion. It got close enough until it was right at his feet. That's when everything became less visible. My nose was up against the window. I was so close to it. My eyes widened like that of a child's at the sight of candy. And that's when I heard it. The dog let out a sharp yelp. I opened the window and put my head out as much as I could to get a better view, but I certainly wasn't heading downstairs to go outside and confront the man. I did go downstairs to phone the police. As I waited for them, I kept my eye on the man. He was in the same place, same posture, same eerie atmosphere. I was sure the dog was dead. I heard its unmistakable cry, followed by complete silence. It was dead, and that psycho across the street was the one who murdered it. But then I heard a bark. It came from exactly the same spot where the man was. I couldn't believe my eyes as I stepped closer to the window. For the first time since I saw him, the man moved. It looked like he was kneeling. He wasn't as towering as he was before, so I'm very sure he was kneeling or something. And every time I heard that bark, his head would move. The man, he was barking, and it sounded exactly like that of a dog. The police arrived. I had told the operator that there was a man standing across the street from my house, and that he killed a stray dog when it walked up to him. The cop parked his cruiser pretty far and began walking towards the man. I felt like opening the window and screaming, "Yes, sir, he's right there. But be careful. I think he's dangerous." I didn't. The officer stood there and spoke with the man for about 10 minutes. Well, the officer spoke at him. It didn't look like the man responded to the questions at all, and the officer grew agitated. I think I learned a lot about body language from this ordeal. I looked away for half a second, and a loud bang rumbled the window. There was a gunshot. I ducked under the frame and crawled under the bed. It was silent for a while. I crawled back to the window and looked over. The officer was dead. A puddle of blood began to slip into the sidewalk drain. My heart wanted to leave my chest. I almost vomited anxiety. I attempted to pick up the phone 3 different times, but each time my hand would grow weak and drop it. I couldn't contain myself. As you could imagine, I wasn't prepared bodily or mentally for what came next. The man stepped forward. That old lamppost dressed him in night yellow, and I could finally see him. The thing is, he looked exactly like the officer, the one laying on the sidewalk dead. He mimicked the dead officer's movements too, everything from the way he walked to his mannerisms when he spoke. It looked like he was even impersonating the way the officer was questioning him those 10 minutes before. And he was naked. By the time the cops arrived, the man was gone. I explained everything to them, over and over again. They questioned me for the next few days. I checked the window each time before bed since that night. I'd even check when I got up in the middle of the night for water or to use the bathroom. But most of the times I got up to check were when I'd wake up from violent nightmares. After some time, comfort came. I believed for a moment that the man was gone for good. But don't we all do that? Don't we all participate in some form of naivety or another? Especially when we desperately want to believe something. I had another nightmare, but there was something different about this one, different in the sense that it felt real. Very, very real. But I remember times when I'd think back on memories and couldn't decide whether they were dreams or reality. Sometimes we mix them up. This was one of those times. In this dream or nightmare, I was sleeping in bed. I wake up startled to a sensation on the back of my head, a cold one, like someone put their frozen hands on me. And as I turn around half asleep, my eyes barely catch someone leaving. I just see their foot for a split second as they get out of sight. And that was the end of the dream. Well, maybe it wasn't a dream. Maybe someone really did walk into my room and touch the back of my head. Because one night, I received the following phone call from a dear friend of mine. "Bryce?" I answered. "Hey," he replied. What's up? Everything okay? Why you calling so late? You think you're funny, Mason?" I paused for a second. "What?" "I got up in bed." "Well," he began, "I was getting ready to go to bed. Then I look out my window, and guess who I see standing outside my house at 1 a.m.? I paused again, confused. "Who?" "Mason, you're really not funny. Who goes this far for a prank? I have no idea what your dash." My heart sped. "Bryce, listen. That man outside your house is dangerous. Call the cops now." I said, "Oh my God, you're really committed to this, aren't you?" "Bryce, I swear to God it's not me. I'm at home. It's the same man who was stalking me just a few days ago." "If that's true," said Bryce, "then why does he look exactly like you?" 7th story. I faced a shapeshifter in Arizona. Have you ever looked evil in the eyes? What if those eyes were all too familiar? My name is Desmond, and this is my story. Believe it or don't, I really don't care. I just can't keep it in my head any longer. This story begins, as many do, with one stupid choice. My friend Carly had heard of a campsite in Arizona rumored to house something supernatural. I won't give the name of the location in case anyone gets the bright idea of going there. Carly was nice, but lacked common sense, so when she told me that she had been dared to spend the night there by her sister, I tried talking her out of it. I've always believed there are things out there that we don't understand. What I don't believe in is tempting fate, and I felt that that was exactly what she was doing. Carly brushed me off, and that's when I made the one stupid decision. I offered to go with her. I know how that sounds, but I actually had a plan. Carly hates driving, so I Googled camping locations in the same 50 miles. I told Carly I would drive and plan on taking her to a different location. I was just trying to keep her out of trouble. We were halfway there when I stopped at the rest stop. My plan was working perfectly. Carly was on her way to a peaceful, boring campsite, and I felt I had done something good. I finished my business and walked out of the restroom. I never noticed the rock half popping out of the dusty ground. I hit it with my foot, losing my balance. I stumbled and tried to catch myself, semi-succeeding as I didn't hit the ground. What I did do was land awkwardly on my right foot, causing my ankle to roll. Damn if that didn't hurt. It clearly wasn't broken, but it was painful to put pressure on. I limped back to the SUV. Carly asked if I was okay and offered to take me to the hospital, but I knew nothing was broken. What I should have done was tell her we needed to turn back around, but I didn't. I was feeling guilty for lying to her and didn't want to disappoint her more. I told her I was fine. Unfortunately, Carly demanded to drive, so I could rest my leg. She put the address in her GPS, and we were off. My plan was ruined. What I should have done was refuse to go, but I knew if I did that I would have to tell the truth, and I didn't want to risk causing issues in our friendship. On we went. It took us a couple more hours, but we got there. There were no other campers in sight. Great sign, I thought to myself. I pondered on how my dumb ass was here. I took a calming breath. Just because a place is rumored to be a certain way doesn't mean it actually is that way. Maybe I was getting myself upset for nothing. As I hobbled out of the SUV, I felt a little silly for my paranoia. The place seemed like a regularly valley. It was hot, but there was a light breeze. We put up our tents a few yards away from each other. We found an old fire pit to pitch next to. We knew it was going to be cold when the sun went down. The next few hours were spent with laughter as we shared stories between each other. We roasted hot dogs on a roaring fire as the sky darkened. It was 10 at night, and not a single abnormal thing had happened. This was turning out to be just a fun camping trip. Around midnight, we went to our prospective tents and drifted to sleep. Carly was disappointed that nothing had happened. I was relieved. I was woken up by the sound of Carly whispering my name as she forced her way into my tent. I looked at my phone. 3 a.m., the witching hour. Carly looked frazzled as she began to ramble. There's something out there. I heard this howling. I don't know how you slept through it, she said in a panic. I was immediately awake and was going to peek out of the tent when she stopped me. No, what if it sees us? I took a deep breath. We need to get to the car. Where are the keys? I asked. In my tent. She whimpered. This was bad. Okay, I can't run with my leg, so I'll jump out and make a distraction. I have a knife. It will have to do. You run to the tent and grab the keys. Ready? She nodded. Just as I was leaving the flap, I heard her say, "Thanks, Derek." Derek? I would have given her a look if it wasn't for the sight that met my eyes. The other tent was in shambles. Clothes were thrown about the campsite. That's not what scared me. There was blood. Too much for a human to lose and survive. Something told me to turn around. I watched as Carly left my tent. Her gait was different, and she had a chilling smile on her face. You call me Derek, I said, a chill going up my spine. I forgot what she called you. My mouth was dry as whatever this thing was advanced. I was going to die. No, I wasn't. I grabbed the knife and stabbed at the top of Carly's stomach. There was a minor wince of pain that turned into a shriek as I pulled the knife down all the way to her pelvis. A black goo began spilling from her. It was too dark to be blood. I pulled the knife up again, but this time she pushed me with an inhuman strength. I hit my head on a rock. The last thing I saw was this thing limping away from the campsite. Everything went black. That was 3 months ago. The DNA of the blood matched Carly's. This was now a murder investigation. And guess who their number one suspect is? I'll probably get off on insanity. I almost don't care. I have too many questions now. The first one, did it die? God, I hope so. And my second question, the one that really gets me. If I saw Carly when it attacked, who did she see before she died? Eighth story. A shapeshifter tried to steal my life. To this very day, I'm not sure if it really happened. The memories seem more like dreams than real events. They don't feel as lucid as other parts of my childhood, like birthdays and sleepovers with my friends or bruises and broken ice cream cones. It's more a series of vague recollections, buried somewhere deep in my unconsciousness. I forget them for years at a time, only for them to resurface as fleeting thoughts that slip away as I try to hold on to them. Left with only an eerie aftertaste, I quickly forget about it as I go about my daily business. That is why I have decided to finally write it down, to immortalize it on paper while it slowly dies in my mind. For all I know, it could just be a figment of my imagination, but the scars on my forearms say otherwise. I don't remember when it started or how long it lasted, but I must have been around 6 or 7 years old, as I had just started going to primary school. I was returning home for dinner after hours of running around with my friends. As I walked in and sat down at the table, I was asked the obligatory question of how my day had been. Excited about my recent playground adventures, I started recounting the tales of the mountains I'd climbed and the monsters I'd fought with my friends, just before dinner time had come and ruined it all. That must have been a short adventure, responded my father indifferently, because I saw you walking about the house a quarter hour ago. This perplexed me. Although, being a bit of a slow learner, I hadn't figured out how to read the clock yet. I was sure that we had spent more time playing than that. Even though this was very strange, I shrugged it off without saying anything else to my parents. And I thought that was the end of it, but it kept happening. Just small things at the beginning, barely significant enough to notice. Sometimes my mom would talk about things that I knew I hadn't done, like how I apparently had been mean to my younger brother the other day, when I was sure I'd spent that day in my room playing video games. Or when I had eaten all the cake, though I clearly remembered the disappointment. When I had come home from school to find an empty tray with nothing but crumbs. This would go on for some time, and even though I found it unfair that I would get blamed for all these things that never happened, my word didn't hold up to the authority of my parents. My adolescent mind would get distracted with more interesting things anyway, and all these ominous events turned to nothing but afterthoughts. That is until I discovered the source of my unjust accusations. One late evening, after returning home from some sport I have long forgotten about, I saw through the window a fourth figure sitting in my regular seat at the dinner table together with my parents and my brother. Something seemed familiar about the outline of the person, but I couldn't put my finger on just what it was. Thinking this silhouette in the dim, warm light of the house was just one of my brother's friends visiting, I casually walked the rest of the way to the house. Just as I passed the window to get to the front door, I heard the creak of a chair getting pushed away from the table, and through the corner of my eye, I glimpsed the unknown guest standing up and walking to the back of the house. Goosebumps raised across my skin, and a cold feeling crawled up my spine. Even though I'd only seen the person for a fraction of a moment, less than enough time to make out any discernible features, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I quickly made it the rest of the way into my family and tried to satisfy my curiosity by asking who the visitor was. What visitor? My mother's answer was less than acceptable. The one that just stood up, I said, raising my voice. Sweetie, there isn't anyone home but us, replied my mother with a nervous smile. My guts had been right, something was wrong, something was way wrong. I tried to mutter some sort of reply, but only managed to produce confused mumbles. With a but, he was just... I reluctantly decided to investigate myself. I slowly walked into the hallway where the phantom had disappeared. Nothing. With the same caution as before, I checked the bathroom and every other room, which all turned out to be equally empty, all except the basement. I had purposefully left it for last because of my fear of the dark. Our basement was just a normal one, with storage shelves, some training equipment, and a freezer, but to 6 years old me, it was the scariest place I could imagine. Standing before the descending stairs, the dark doorway seemed like a gaping abyss. I breathed in and readied myself for the wall of darkness I had to go through to reach the light switch. But as I took the first step, I sensed a motion to my left. My heart leaped to my throat, and I turned around startled. I gasped loudly at the sight that met me, a corgi. I was as surprised as I was confused. We've never had a dog before. The small creature looked at me for a few seconds. Its otherwise innocent face and eyes like small black marbles looked at me with an unconcerned expression, devoid of the usual energy and curiosity you'd expect from a dog. After a moment of silence, it turned towards the basement door and clattered down the stairs, disappearing into the void. "Mom," I yelled without taking my eyes away from the basement. "When do we get a dog?" "We've always had a dog," it echoed from the kitchen. "Come sit down again. You haven't eaten up? Always had a dog? Sit down again?" I hadn't sat down yet since coming home, let alone started eating. And we had never owned a dog. This was all too much for me to process, so I slowly backed out of the hallway before turning around and running as soon as the basement was out of my sight. I quietly sat down at the dinner table, where a half-eaten plate of pasta was lying at my seat. If I had been older, I could have asked more questions about the dog and the guest, but I was a quiet kid, and my previous attempts at addressing any of this had proven fruitless. I sat through the rest of the dinner without eating anything. My appetite disappeared looking at the half-eaten portion of pasta that the enigmatic figure had left behind. I went to bed early right after dinner and slept uneasily through the night. The figure, the dog, and the weird comments from my mom kept circulating through my head, making falling fully asleep impossible. I woke up to the sound of birds chirping and the sun shining through the window curtains. I sighed with relief. Maybe it had all been a bad dream. The surrealness of it all made it hard to believe it really happened. This false safety that dawn had brought was, however, shattered the moment I stood up. In the open doorway, which I explicitly remembered closing, stood the corgi and stared at me. The evening's events had actually happened. Anger flushed through me. "Why are you here, you stupid dog?" I snared childishly and turned around to my wardrobe, not expecting an answer from an animal. "I'm going to steal your life." I froze on the spot. The sinister voice had unmistakably been my own. The same spine-crawling feeling of fear that I felt when I saw the fourth occupant of the dinner table return to me. It was like waking up from a nightmare, only to realize you were still sleeping and had just entered a new one. I spun around quickly, ready to jump whatever this thing was. As I took off toward my adversary, I realized that it wasn't a dog standing in front of me anymore. It was a carbon copy of myself, boasting a menacing grin. This both horrified me and fueled my anger. Where I the night before had fled, a streak of adrenaline gave me the confidence to stand my ground. I charged the clone, wrestled it to the ground, and I exerted all the force I could manage to pin it down. And just as it seemed I would win the fight, the weight under me instantly disappeared. Before I could fully register what had happened, the chubby corgi slipped out from under me and fled into the hallway. I don't recall if I already fully understood what was happening at that moment. I definitely knew it to some extent. Any adult would have been dumbfounded, but a child's mind works differently. It can make a connection in places a mature brain would gloss over or discard as impossible. Even if I hadn't figured it exactly out yet, I would in the coming days. The dog, the figure, and my supernatural doppelganger was one and the same, some sort of shape-shifting entity trying to impose as myself when I wasn't present. It wasn't faultless, but almost. Sometimes I could catch it off guard by pretending to leave, only to hide in the hallway and wait for it to appear from the shadowy depths of the basement, usually in the form of myself. I would try to catch it and apprehend it while calling for my parents. But as soon as they came, it had morphed into something else, sometimes the dog, sometimes my brother, always appropriately crying or whining, making my parents think I was just throwing a tantrum. However, the moment my parents weren't around anymore, it would drop the charade, and its visage would turn to a mockingly debonair grin, letting me know that I hadn't won the battle. I don't know how long it continued to go on, weeks, months, maybe even years. I turned increasingly violent and paranoid. I would lash out at friends and family, thinking they were the tormenting charlatan, sometimes to realize I had been wrong, other times to be met with that all-too-familiar telltale smile. Whenever I thought I finally was about to expose it, it would either in the blink of an eye change its shape or retreat into the basement when that wasn't an option. My parents tried in vain to send me to therapy and anger management, but I knew that the moment I gave up would be the moment I lost my life to the shapeshifter. One faithful evening where I was home alone, I finally managed to corner it. With no parents home, it couldn't pretend to be my brother or the dog being bullied by me and seek their help. I wanted it gone and out of my life, but I wanted answers even more. What are you, and why do you want my life? I yelled desperately. You wouldn't understand who I am or where I come from. But that doesn't matter. You'll see soon enough. It's a dark place down there, beneath the floorboards. Once I have your life and your memories, you'll be the one trapped there. For the first time, I saw a hint of sorrow in its otherwise evil smile. I can forget about it and lead a normal life. This was the last straw. I couldn't take it anymore, and all the pent-up anger in me started boiling over. At first, it turned into the dog and tried to flee, but I grabbed its hind legs and smashed it into the wall with a hollow thud. This seemed to stun it for a moment, because I managed to pick it up and started dragging it towards the basement door. As soon as it realized where I was taking it, it started frantically kicking and biting, trying to get free, but I just held on tighter despite the retaliation. The closer we got, the more panicked its movements became. It started rapidly morphing from one form to another. This time I could see the otherwise almost instant metamorphosis, how its skin started almost boiling before bloating into a new shape. It didn't seem to be able to take a form bigger than a child, but its face jumped between all my family members, and even to ones I hadn't seen before. I kept strangling it as I dragged it inch by inch, repeatedly hitting it as hard as I could whenever I could spare a free hand. Just before the door, its fingers morphed into claws that dug deep into my forearm. I winched in pain, but gathered the strength to throw it against the wall, hard enough to hear bone crack. Before I threw it down the basement stairs, it begged one last plead. Please don't send me down. I beg you, please, please, please. But I didn't listen. I kicked the mangled body down the stairs, slammed the door, and locked it up. I don't remember what happened afterward. No more incidents happened, and the dog disappeared, so my attack must have worked. The gaping wounds I had gotten were blamed on the dog. Whose idea was it to get that damn dog anyway? We're lucky it ran away. How my father said. To be honest, and I don't even know when we got it, replied my mom, for the first time acknowledging that something strange had been going on. Anyway, life returned to the usual. My wounds healed and turned to faded scars, and I forgot about it all. That is all I can recall of the events. Or almost all. There are other, even more faint memories, darker and more uncommon. Ones that only visit me in the silence of the night when all other sounds can't drown out these obscure recollections. They are of a dark and damp place, of crawling up cold cliffs and sharp rocks, of seeing the warm light of a well-lit home through the cracks of the floorboards, and of the desire to take what was never mine to begin with.